Shalom and welcome to Congregation Shabbat Teaching. I hope that you're looking forward to delving deeper into the Word of God with me as we continue to study the weekly Torah portions together. Our portions for the week are found in the book of Exodus chapter 18 through chapter 20 verse 23. And our Haftorah portion is found in the book of Isaiah chapter 6 verses 1 through chapter 7 verse 6. And then continuing in chapter 9, verses 5 and 6. Our New Covenant reading is found in Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through chapter 8, verse 1. As we open our portion this week, we find Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, coming out to him in the wilderness to reunite him with his wife, Zipporah, and his 2 sons. Now as he nears, Moses goes out to greet him where they spend time catching up. And Moses tells him of all the mighty and awesome things the Lord did to bring his people out of Egypt. Together they return to camp and Jethro stays a while longer with his family. But to his concern, he watches as Moses is forced to spend his time from sunup to sundown, smothered by the people's problems, both petty and significant. Now, Jethro, being a wiser and more seasoned man, sees that this will quickly wear Moses out and surely bring him to an untimely end. So Jethro counsels Moses of a better way to do things. It says, "What are you doing, or what you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You're not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all of the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide for themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace." Now, interestingly enough, Jethro's wisdom shown here in this passage served as the founding model for our judicial system, the jurisdiction and the hierarchy of our law enforcement system, and even the model for the hierarchy seen within the church. Soon after Jethro leaves to return home, we see God lead the people to the wilderness of Sinai. It is in this passage that we see a vivid description of God descending upon Mount Sinai in smoke and fire, and the giving of the 10 Commandments. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image to worship it. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Shabbat, the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. And you shall not covet." In our Haftorah portion this week, we find ourselves in the midst of a very well-known passage in Isaiah. It says, "I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, and each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And after he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. As the passage continues, we see that God prophetically declares that his people will become spiritually hardened, blinded and deafened, unable to understand the things of the Lord. And in desperation, Isaiah cries out, How long, O Lord? And God answers with an ominous and yet miraculous statement. Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. He's speaking about the promised land. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth tree or an oak, whose stump still remains in the ground even after it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. As we conclude this passage, we see Jerusalem and the house of David about to come under attack from the joined forces of the king of Syria and the king of the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel. Just to clarify, now Ahaz, king of the southern kingdom of Judah, is fearful that he will not be able to withstand such an attack and that Jerusalem will fall into their hands. So God sends Isaiah with a message to King Ahaz. Be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle, tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called the Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Ironically, the one passage that is most associated with every Christmas pageant you've ever attended does not originate in Luke chapter 2 or really in any of the Gospels at all for that matter, but rather it originates here in this context as a prophetic promise that God would defend his promise to David, that the throne would never leave his lineage, that the Messiah would come through that house, through the house of David, and that the ultimate kingdom, the Messianic kingdom, would be established through him. And as such, Judah would not fall until the Messiah had come. In our New Covenant reading, we find Yeshua teaching the crowds, Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Now this word righteousness in Hebrew is tzedakah, but it's been replaced in modern Judaism with the word mitzvot, which means commandments, but it's still used to imply good deeds, as we see here. Now Yeshua goes on to touch on these good deeds or acts of righteousness and uses charity and prayer as examples. Now in these examples, he presents that goodness and righteousness should be practiced for their own sake and for their own just rewards, but never in the hopes of exploiting them to your own benefit. In other words, give to give, not give to get, and pray out of your relationship with God, not out of a sense of self-righteousness or piety. He concludes this particular topic with his own exemplary prayer that we know of as the Lord's Prayer. Now, Yeshua continues in his teaching, touching on various topics: fasting, heavenly treasures versus materialism, anxieties over physical material and needs, judging and condemning others, how to treat others. Now, while it's easy to take each one and rightfully turn it into a teaching of its own, not a single topic here was of any special note to its audience. In fact, Yeshua is doing nothing other than simplifying some of the more basic commandments of the Mosaic Law into an easy-to-understand version of themselves. Nothing outrageous, nothing new or spectacular. And yet at the end of the passage we read that the crowds were amazed, astonished by the authority with which he spoke. And here's why I believe that is. In the beginning of his teaching, he starts off with a topic that everyone relates to. They hate hypocrites. He then builds on from that topic. He builds on that from topic to topic, with each topic being a fairly simple one to grasp. But throughout it all, he starts weaving in this element of trust in God. And that trust is built on relationship with God. And that relationship with God is like a tree that bears fruit. A healthy relationship bears healthy fruit naturally and without effort. A diseased tree bears sick fruit naturally and without effort. As such, all the righteous acts in the world without a relationship with God are in fact acts of hypocrisy. Sick fruit from a sick tree and good for nothing other than to be cut down and burned. He then nails this point home with his final statement. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Or cast out demons in your name? And do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. You see, the reason the crowd was astonished was because this seemed to be in direct conflict with everything they'd ever understood. They'd always believed that acts of righteousness were public signs of your relationship with God, like a measuring stick. But Yeshua was saying that it was the other way around. The reason the crowd was so amazed by this teaching is that for the first time it was no longer about righteous living according to the letter of the law. It was about relationship with the giver of the law. And if having a relationship with the giver of the law naturally produces righteousness, then the law could no longer stand as a slave driver demanding that they produce righteousness of their own. Instead, their righteousness, like the fruit of a tree, doesn't come from the branch itself, but instead it comes from the branch's relationship to the root of the tree. You see, I find it very interesting that in the very Messianic prophecy found in our Haftarah this week, when Isaiah asked God how long his people would be left blind, deaf, and bereft of understanding, that God's response would use the same graphic analogy as we see Yeshua use here in the New Covenant. He says, and though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth tree or an oak tree, whose stump remains in the ground even after it's been fallen. And the holy seed, or its offspring, is its stump. And just 2 chapters later, in Isaiah 11, Isaiah would clearly identify the stump and its messianic importance. It says, and a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, the father of David. From his roots, a branch, meaning the Messiah, will bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. Even here, God is painting a picture saying that the old tree, diseased and corrupted with self-righteous hypocrisy, would be cut down. But out of the stump of Jesse, out of the covenant that he had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, out of the promise that he had made with David and King Solomon, a new shoot would emerge. A new tree that would emerge and that would be appointed with the Spirit of the Lord, a Messianic line. Not a tree that would replace his people, but that would, by the power of the appointed one, the Messiah, the Holy One of Israel, would raise up both Jacob, would restore Israel to its spiritual heritage, but that it would also incorporate branches that are being grafted in from all tongues and tribes and nations from around the globe. Natural born and grafted in branches, and that they would naturally and without effort produce the righteousness of God. Because like sap flows through the tree, the Spirit of the Lord would naturally flow from the root through the tree to the branches. I want to leave you this week with this question. It's one that I find I have to ask myself on a regular basis. How's your relationship with the Lord doing? If your answer looks something like an itinerary of activities, then I'd caution you to take pause and re-inspect. I've often found that the busier we become doing stuff for the kingdom, the easier it is to slip away from our relationship with our Lord, with our Creator, the very source of our life, our hope, and our grace-based righteousness. With great love, I encourage you to stay tapped in. Make that your focus. And don't worry so much about the rest. The rest will come naturally. It'll be produced naturally through the Spirit of the Lord. And it'll be the sweetest fruit that the world has ever tasted. Well, my friends, that is our teaching for the week. I hope that you're encouraged by it, challenged by it, and I hope that you had a blessed Shabbat and a fantastic week to come. Shabbat Shalom.